Hello. All right. So I've been thinking about just some conversations I've had this week that keep reoccurring, and so I figure I guess what I'll do is I'll share a little bit about um, my own personal kind of journey with some things, especially when it comes to relationships with women. Um, there isn't one woman that I've been with that I probably don't owe amends to in some form or another. Not because I was malicious, but because, like most men, I think I didn't know how to love yet, and I still struggle with it. Right. Um, I think only Christ can give us the power to love as we should. Most of my relationships were, very passionate, very uh, just intense. Usually when they were, and then you know, what I'll say is this: I've been single for a while now, and I'm still a man, and of course, women are beautiful, but women are beautiful for many reasons, and I think the just the aesthetic thing is very nice. Beauty in nature, all those things are nice to see, and God is good in that way, right? But I guess I heard a parable about the difference between like and love is if you like a flower you pick it, and if you love a flower you water it. And I think that's an old Buddhist maybe proverb or something. I'm probably messing it up, but anyway, the point is that as men, I think we get kind of, if you guys are anything like me, it's like I can imagine myself becoming you know um, just successful in this and that, and start imagining what would I do if I had power and these sorts of things. And the truth is I have wielded those powers in my past kind of unwittingly, and you don't have to be you know uh, I guess I guess what I'm saying is that now I recognize that there's a whole genetic line behind every person, and so when you see a woman dancing in the strip club, that's your grandmother, that's the little girl, child, like that's sister, whatever, but like just to try to think of a nurturing woman that's been in your life that you had love for but weren't necessarily sexually attracted to. And our culture kind of, not that it's wrong to appreciate beauty, but to boil down anyone to a value that is measurable by perhaps money or anything of that nature, we begin to lose the humanity in the whole thing from both sides. From a man's point of view and from the woman's point of view. I think for men we're kind of more equipped for the world of trade in that sense, because it's we have to think in terms like that just to provide, and so it gets kind of convoluted to you know um, what value is, right? So in my past I've dated people from women from that worked in the adult industry, and they were just like any of us. We all have issues and stuff, um, but I realized how my role in it was really selfish. I wasn't trying to be selfish necessarily, but I was definitely trying to fill a void. And it's easy to kind of think that a woman can fill that void for a man because we consider a man complete with a woman by his side and this and that. But really, biblically speaking, it's better for you to hide in the attic of your mansion than to have a quarrelsome wife. So it's not a matter of, and that's saying that as men, I think we don't emphasize I guess um, the maturity and the rite of passage that it really takes to actually love, right? Because like as men, you know, uh, I'll speak for myself. When I started to understand what love really was, then I started to understand how wrong I had it and how much pain I had unintentionally caused myself and others. And it's so I started tracking it back. Like what kind of motivates this? What is the underlying kind of, I guess, commoditization of people? And I see it all over. Like even when we go to work, we're trading our time that we could be with our families and loved ones for a dollar amount. And I don't know about you all, but if you've lived long enough, you understand that time is best spent on the things that you really love, and the things that matter, the things that give you purpose. And that's not really easily put into a um, dollar amount value, or a denomination of any amount, really. I guess once you put a price on yourself, or yeah, once you what's the word I'm looking for? Um, yeah, well, once you put a dollar amount on your value, you're no longer priceless. And God says we're priceless, each one of us. And I think it's important to remember that and to believe it, because as I have tried to apply this principle in my life, it's caused some friction at jobs and things like that, because I don't work for man, I work for God, which means that no matter who's paying my wage, um, I put God first still. So if I see a neighbor in need, if I see a troubled person, where a word of encouragement or whatever, maybe 20 minutes of encouragement might be, um, it might take away from what I was doing, but it adds in ways that are more valuable and than a dollar amount. And it's kind of a hard, I guess, mental gymnastics for people to understand this, and I had first started applying this kind of principle and when I was in jail. So it was really difficult in there because, it was like everything in my life was always, if you borrow ramen noodle, I'm gonna get two at least back, and then like trying to walk in faith for something I didn't understand. I was just trying to actively step into faith and behave as if I believed. And I was amazed to find out that as I applied those principles, you know, um, like to give without any expectation of reciprocity because it was a gift. It was something that I gave. It was really hard for me to get out of that mindset because I knew who I gave to, and I knew when they got stuff and didn't repay me. And old Aaron wasn't happy about that. But I'll tell you, when I needed something for real, not when I was just like being resentful, but when I actually needed stuff, like it would come out of left field, out of nowhere, in a surprising way, and as a result of other, I guess, other actions being principled in God. So it's kind of like my eyes started to open to this whole kind of weaving that it's in books and stuff, but they're all kind of plagiarizing off of the original, but it's not a competition. So however you get there, and just anyway. But so about the women thing, right? Like I can't help but, since I got to know some of the women that I knew that did these things, like, man, they were just hurt, and were doing the best that they could to just kind of provide maybe for their families and this and that, and just also because it was what I find in most you know destructive kind of environments, right, that I've had, and honestly with some of my best friends that I love dearly that are no longer around. Most of them are dead or prison for life or whatever. But it's that I would surround myself with other people that were like-minded so that I could validate my thinking, as we all kind of glorified self. And I'll speak for myself. I don't I realized that it was, I was perpetuating something that kept landing me sick, in jail, broke, and considering very dark stuff. And that became the normal, the chaos. It was exciting. I could do, we're capable of a lot of things if we put our minds to it. We just tend to, at least for me, I suppose it's like this for everyone. We're lulled into this belief that we got to maintain these images and of what we think success is, or what we think a relationship's supposed to be. And like the thing is you know well, I genuinely tried to love the women that I've been with. I was pretty poor at being um just good influence. I probably wasn't the worst influence in their lives, but I definitely could have been a better one, right? And so I kind of learned this when just historically speaking. Not that I ever really run into any exes or anything, but you know, if I could encourage them now to, find and seek God, I would. And, that they're loved and forgiven just like I've been, with some repentance and some course corrections, I guess you can, I don't know if that's right. Just filling more of myself with God and Christ, and then the kind of negative stuff goes out, but still, I'm still a man, right? I still have desire. I think there's, let me see, there's a quote in the Bible, and one of you guys will probably blast me for this, but it's, about if your right eye causes you to sin, to pluck it out. It's better to pluck it out. And I think a lot of young guys need to understand this. Like our especially like in our youth, we need to really practice training and pushing our bodies into submission, right? And that'll help you get spiritually strong, and also help you understand that pain and these types of things, like stretching yourself, is important, because you'll find in those moments where you push yourself the farthest, like especially when you're running is a good example. You push yourself like, oh, I'm not gonna make it to this mark, and you go further because you just focus on the next step, and the next thing you know, you're like, whoa, that mark's back there behind me. And you also get what they call a runner's high, and it's like clarity. But that's a result that happens however we decide to push ourselves. I think that in the pursuit of being an image bearer for God, we have to push ourselves, and that means like pushing ourselves to be more Christ-like. So in turn, what I'm saying is that if your lustfulness is causing you to objectify women, go handle business. Like, dude, you'll get some clarity. And you won't make a bad decision out of it. And now I say this, and I know it'll be controversial, but the alternative, just thinking about harming your brother, the same as murder, basically. Like, it's the thought. We have to capture the thoughts, and we're embodied. We're biological. So we have to recognize and be aware of our strengths and our weaknesses, and that's where it's helpful to expose them to friends and people you trust, and people you can be honest with. Honestly, you can be honest with anyone. Screw it. Like, what do you have to lose? Who cares what anybody thinks? Like, it's not going to do you any good to concern yourself with another comparison of you from anybody else, other than what standard you're trying to reach for yourself. Like, I don't hold anyone else to the standards that I keep myself. Otherwise, I'll be let down, and it's an expectation that I have no control over. But I do have some control to encourage people to try to set expectations for what they want. And so I know there's a lot of like guilt and condemnation that says, oh well, it's like a lot of people have relationships that are just really struggling, and it's terrible, because I know the men that I speak with, and they love their spouse, but they got caught up in their sins, and it's hard, and it's like, so how do we wrestle it? How do we, and in my experience, it's like, when I was in, when I was in uh, my late teens, I was pretty secular. I I mean, I liked the idea of Jesus, but I didn't understand. I understood lust as like, you know, kind of, I understood affection as kind of a romantic, lusty kind of thing, feeling butterflies in the stomach, all this stuff that you get in the money honeymoon phase, money, and it's like the reality is, you know, I think if you don't get to know the woman that you or want to be with, like if you don't get to know her, and like I think this is good exercise to think of, like what if she was burned, like 80% of her body and mutilated, would you still love her? Could you still see her for the beauty that she holds? And that's the kind of connection that God wants with us, because He sees us, all of us, trust me. And it's not pretty. And what do you think faithfulness is? So cultivate relationship, like get to know who this person is, where they're from, what they are, and help them. As men, we're supposed to encourage them to grow into a person that's complete, that you guys can add to each other. And it's so hard in this society, right? We've got the men thinking that we got to, build these empires and be in some sort of position of authority or whatever it is, and then we've got the girls thinking that, you're a simp unless you have a Lamborghini and this and that and da 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 da, but like the truth is, you can you can connect with anybody if you'll just take the time to get to know them, right? But most people think that they're getting to know somebody by the image that they present, by the things that they have, um, maybe by the woman or the man they're with. And the truth is, none of that really says a lot about. It doesn't say much about who we are as people. What we do in secret, what we do in silence, is what God sees and God knows about. And I promise you that it's not going unnoticed. And until we face those things in ourselves, we have a hard time seeing it, and just in the world, even, for what it really is. And I don't ascribe to the victim mentality, but the reality is, we are commoditized. We just, from my own independently verifiable evidence of my life, I've been advertised to most of it. And I've gotten to see how ads have developed and how they've targeted demographics. And the thing is all of the stuff together is what you have to look at, in context. Anything that makes you feel incomplete, sick, fearful, anything that is a infraction upon your constitutional rights, pretty much, if you actually understand what that means, like all of those things are designed to make you feel like you need some sort of outside intervention, to make you feel complete, and that's the same thing with women, right? Like, it's like, oh, we get this, it's really bad with us guys, because I mean, women are beautiful, right? But they're also so much more beautiful than that. Like, I mean, it's hard to see sometimes in today's day and age, because so many women have been, and men have just wrecked each other trying to, and me included, and we're just trying to like fit into these molds of what's cool, of what feels good. And I just see so much. I've seen some of the most beautiful women have very hard lives, and and now, that I'm older, some of these women, you wouldn't recognize them, but that's still the same person that like you knew in high school or whatever, that that would let you cheat off of their test or whatever it was, in my case, because I didn't go to school too much, but so, and then also, though, their mothers and their daughters, and like they're just more. We as men are more than that too, like we sell a piece of ourselves. Don't think we don't, just because you think you paid for it and that's the end of it. It's not. I'll tell you something about genetics another time, and just relationship. I'll tell you this, that everything is in relation to everything, and it's a serious thing. I would say that's kind of uh, the point of the whole thing, right? Is to have relation with the world and have peace and joy and love in your life, right? And it's so hard to cultivate those things when you feel incomplete and you have to, achieve to feel successful, or to, you know, uh, or to obtain, to possess, to feel even, or to see yourself as um, something more, and it's kind of difficult to wrap your mind around the fact that you're enough. You already are complete. You've just been told differently. And, in the Garden of Eden, we were naked and complete. We had no need for anything. We trusted in God. And the fruit, the poisonous fruit that we ate from, has us believing all sorts of false narratives. And I'll encourage you to take time to get to know the people that you interact with daily. Like, get to actually know them outside of your scheduled work hours, maybe like an hour before work. Come and try to fellowship, even if it's not I mean, I encourage reading the Bible, but more so, I know God can reach everybody and isn't limited to, our parameters, so I think God works very effectively in relationship. And just in the cultivating of it. I was speaking to a couple of girls when I was doing some laundry at the laundromat, and they were just cracking up. So I was like, what's so funny? What's going on? And they were just telling me they haven't seen each other in a while, and since they started, talking, they just couldn't stop laughing. It was like, I'm sure a lot of y'all have experienced that. You separate from friends and you get back together, and it's like, it's just right back to where it was. Those are great, oftentimes lifelong friends, I hope. But we get caught up in our lives and we lose sight of these, things, right? And and so for me, I definitely realized, I think in maybe like 10 years ago when I was sitting in jail, that all the relationships that I had been cultivating were they weren't like bad, like I had fun with these people, but all of us were so selfishly involved in our own destruction that we just needed each other to validate that what we were all doing was good somehow, because we were all doing it, and it made us feel, at least it made me feel better about, the lack of authenticity and the emphasis on carnal things, that is always like gnawing. It doesn't ever end. And so, don't get me wrong, I'm kind of still the same person in a lot of ways. I just understand things a lot, maybe a lot more well-rounded than I used to. I wasn't always, like in my teens, I'm pretty sure I got to the end of the internet because I watched all the porn, and just like, it was like it invaded into my thoughts and in my relationship to where I couldn't really, like, it was like I needed it a lot of times just to like spice it up because it got boring, and that was more a sign of a lot of other issues that were going on in my relationship, relationships, but, or whatever. But the thing that, that I was reflecting on, is because I stopped, actually, when I got out of jail once, and it's been for a couple of years or something. So I got back in, I had like a phone and wasn't really like tech savvy anymore because I just hadn't been, not that I don't know, but anyway, so this girl hit me up and kept bugging me about like, doing like a exchange, and I was like, no, I'm good, better not, but I caved eventually. And then, had a little fun, and, next thing you know, I get a text or something, I forget exactly how it was done, but it was a message saying, if I don't pay some money, they're going to blackmail me. And, I know my dirt. So that just made me crack up because it's like, that's not even close to the worst crap I've done, and I really don't care because, I just put it right there at the foot of the cross, right away, immediately, and it gave me insight, to how, just in my experience with how condemnation and how that's different from conviction, and how accusing, and that accusing spirit and that condemning spirit is one that will allow you to be extorted too because of fear of, these things. So it's like, a lot of people will continue in their sin because they're afraid of it being exposed. So it gets worse and bigger, and but eventually the truth comes out no matter what. And, in one way or another, at some time or another, and so it's like, I guess one of the things I would encourage men to exercise, right, to get away from porn addiction and just objectifying women in general. Like, of course, I appreciate beauty and I appreciate art. So, and I love all of it. Sex is sacred. I mean, bodies are beautiful. God made us. Like we should be able to appreciate these things and not turn it into a consumption more so than an appreciation. Because there's liking the flowers, picking it, and loving it is cultivating it to grow. Like you don't want your daughter. Like, don't get me wrong. I've known and been around a lot of people that life circumstances lead people to make these these capitulations, I guess, to these infractions into our self-esteem and to what we have to do in order to survive or to have what we need, and it's designed like that. Like, I mean, geez, it's like they make us need insurance, right? And then give us the illusion of choice by having insurance commercials for all these things, but you're required to have it by law, so there's no competitive consumer market. Like, same thing in medical stuff. It's like, so I've gotten to see this kind of distortion in our consumer protection legal kind of pursuits that used to be more of the pursuits of like Robert Kennedy and stuff, which he still does, but I mean, I can't follow everybody, but and just aside from politics and stuff, it's just there was more of an emphasis because it was more localized. Like, people knew their communities better, and that is where our democracy is effective, when we are participating locally and are concerned more with who our local representatives are than who our national ones are, because again, those are the ones that actually affect us, right? And it's in your community. Now we have this problem where a lot of the elected officials don't even live in the communities they represent and all this stuff. So, it's become polluted, to say the least. And not that all these people are bad. Well, I mean, according to Jesus, we don't stand a chance, but with Jesus, with Christ, we have a chance. We have hope because we can be honest. We can start exposing the truth. And the truth is that I struggle with, wanting to, like, I'm a man, like, who doesn't want to have, like, it's just crazy stuff, but women do it too, and if not worse, you know what I mean? But like, we have to expose these things. It's a little healthier with couples and with, men with men and women with women that have, let's say, you don't want to take advice from a 14-time divorcee on relationships. You want to take advice from somebody who's, managed to have peace and joy in their marriage at, at some point. No, I'm kidding. But like, you want to take advice from people that are successful at what it is you're trying to achieve, and that is lacking in the kind of the pursuit of entertainment, I guess you could say. It's very sensually based, and it's designed to be that way, and it leads the youth into types of prison. Like, there's different cycles and different, I think, we're prisoners of our minds far before we ever actually get locked up or anything like that. But there's also prisons that are cyclical in our behaviors and things. And the older you get, the harder it is to break them, right? And so, just also just the whole problem that we have with identifying with sicknesses and like if I get cancer, I'm not going to walk around and say, hey, I'm cancer. Like how does that make sense? How is that helpful? How does that help my mind and my spirit? To look at myself that way. There isn't one person on this planet that doesn't have something of value to contribute. That could be a lesson. It could be, an example for or against something. Mostly, I think that we are kind of, let's say, separated from really being able to explore that part of ourselves because we're so conflicted with the, I guess the narrative that the spirit of division or the accusing spirit or the condemning spirit, which is really prevalent, would have us think. And like a lot of industry is built on that. A lot of industry is built on that. Like, and it's just part of the nature of, I guess, trade. It's almost like an infection. It's like trade is a good tool. Especially this is where money comes from. But like, how do you quantify certain things? And who's creating these values? And like, if you aren't asking yourself these things, then then you're gonna be susceptible to their power over you. If you don't question, why do I need to, have, like, okay, I'll give you an example. Like, have you ever been on the phone and with, like, one of these, like, phone company or whatever, and they're asking you these questions, that are like repetitive, that they already know the answers to, but they say they're required to ask them, so they do. Like, but they already know the answers based on, like, so it's like our agency gets stolen when we don't recognize these little kind of things, right? And so the more our agency gets stolen, the more we devalue others, the more we see less of ourselves in each other, the more we diminish the true value that we can bring. Because, like, the value that we have isn't what we can possess. It's not found in what we can possess. It's not found in any of the things that we can ultimately lose. That none of that is value if we can lose it, right? Value accrues. Value is inherently uh, increasing. Otherwise, it's devalued, right? Or yeah, so it's really been a challenge for me to, like, I love to create and do art and make music, and just, like, those have always been my passion, but I've always been separated from it by this idea that I need to have these other things taken care of before I can do these things, right? And the same thing goes with, like, oh, well, if I was rich, then I would help people, and then I realized, wait a minute, I can help people because I'm rich already, just like you are. And the job that they threaten to, fire you from because you did something that is, you know, uh, a principled action based on God, like, fire me 100 times, please. I don't want to work for somebody that doesn't recognize truth. Or at least it's not going to hurt my feelings. I'm not going to feel some type of way. I'm actually going to feel sorry that you don't know better. And it's just really prevalent, right? And so many families are broken apart because of these circumstances and these things that have us in prison, and one of those prisons is lustful, licentious kind of thinking, and they, especially for men and women, don't get it twisted. We are all, like, I've heard some conversations on all this, it's really, the reality is it's almost like exciting, right? To think about, when especially when I was younger, some of the crap that I pulled felt so thrilled and exciting until I got to see years later some of the resulting fallout from those actions, and that wasn't fun. And, like, when you can connect it all and see what really happens, how these things transcend into the next generations, and into that, like, it becomes a lot more serious, and something to consider. Um, I can't tell you how many men have spent tons of money on women they don't know, and aren't doing anything for their daughters. But it goes the other way. I know so many women that have, I've known a lot of women that have, multiple income streams from baby daddies, this and that, and they look at it like, like a paycheck, and they're not using it in the right way either, and they're using it to, um, to further their sinful behaviors, which are ultimately just attempts to try to have joy, and we do that through pleasure. So the thing that I wanted to say that I kind of should, I'll have to cut this probably, which I'll never get around to, but maybe I'll put it up anyway. But so if you're a man or a woman, and you have yourself in the crosshairs of being able to see yourself, where you're aware of like you're thinking before it turns into action, and you have a chance to do something, right? Pluck it out. One way to pluck it out is to expose the idea, like, say it out loud, and rebuke it, even if others can hear it, because we all deal with it, but we keep it secret because we think we're alone, in all of this craziness, but we're not. And maybe if you're a man and you've been watching porn and you can't find yourself to get pleasure without some sort of stimulation like that, I encourage you to fast from it. And then if you find yourself really ruminating in those kinds of thoughts about women or whatever, go and handle it, but don't do it alone, and do it. And I want you to think of it like this: instead of what you normally go through your photo reel or whatever it is, try to just clear your mind, and let it be for what God, like, say to yourself, what is it that God, I guess I'll say it differently, that, like, for the possibility, instead of what you're imagining and forcing to happen, like, let it be for the possibility of what God has planned for you, which is far better than any of those things, I promise, right? And it might not be a clear image, but know that God knows the desires of your heart, and that, like, that fulfillment that you're trying to get from the pleasure, um, it, it goes back to where it's supposed to be. Because God knows you love beauty. God knows, but it's nothing you've seen yet. It's nothing you've known yet, and it's something far better than anything that you can buy or get from inflicting more hurt on another person. So, you know, that's your grandma. That's your, it's just women offer so much more beauty than just their looks, and that's why some of the most pretty, like looking women are so very, you know, uh, same thing with guys. The most flashy guys, they don't really have anything of substance. Well, not all of them. You know what I'm saying? But it's harder for a rich man than a pass camel through the head of a needle, right? There's a reason for that, and I know that just in my own personal life with the little stuff I do have, I find it's often running me more than I want it to. So, what I'm saying is that we live in a world full of lies, guys, ladies and gentlemen, and there's truth and there's freedom, right? But we have to really allow Christ to take hold of our hearts to break free of the chains, um, and to learn how to love. For me, you know, uh, started in just getting to know who God is and asking for that, for that understanding. And what that meant for me was I had to look at myself honestly, and you know I honestly I have amends to make, and I probably won't ever be able to make them all, nor will I be able to remember all the things that I need to make amends for. But I put that at the foot of the cross, and it's okay. Like I don't have to keep making the same mistakes, and I'm not those things. And uh, if if we're just less afraid to be vulnerable in the sense of like I never understood the thing like vulnerability, showing that vulnerability as a man can tend to be like mocked, right? But I'll say this, um, it's showing your vulnerability when you know you're willing to give your freedom and watch your fellow human beings willingly willingly give in to the lie that has them imprisoned and suffering. That's vulnerability, like that I just can't live with. I can't. I am a debtor to the freedom that I have gained and who it comes from. I owe everything to that, and I would be remiss not to try to at least share it, right? And explain it. And I know it's a little heady and whatever. If anybody can follow along long enough, in this ADD world or whatever you want to call it, basically impulsive, immediate gratification land. That being said, all things that are of God and for God are good. So the problem is the enemy likes to confuse and twist the meanings of things, right? That's why we can have laws and still have injustice under law, right? I mean, um, that's why we can have justice that isn't legal, right? And whether it's divine or whatever, the point being is we all want we all want truth and justice, really. I think except for the people that benefit from taking it. Now, I want you to think: are these people, or is it a type of spirit? Just think about it. Is it so hard to conceive of? Like how well do you know? All right, I'll ask you a question. Let's put it into like real terms. Just in your daily life, like cooperation between people, and it's very effective when it's managed well and people are working together for the same purpose. But when you see like any industry, it looks like it's working towards a purpose. Like in the medical field, we're here to treat you, to treat your illness. Um, but it's the consumer that they want, not a one-time healed client. And if they can't have that, then they'd rather you not exist. And can't wait to be home. So, but I'm not. Anyway, I just I really I really understand the like struggle and the kind of deep rooted intimacy and affection and definition of what love is, like the confusion and all of that, right? That we have based on what is distributed to us. We'll say not everywhere, but it's really important that you are deliberate in what you consume for entertainment, for any of those things. Because one thing I do know is like it's not going to help anyone anywhere if we're like pointing at all the things that are wrong in the world. Everybody can do that. We can do that to each other. We can point, 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 point. I know for a fact none of that gets rid of any of those things. It's important to, yes, speak on it. I wouldn't say condemn it though. I would just say instead of condemning and accusing these people for being the root of all these problems, just like in recovery, like you have to, at least the most effective methods that I've seen aren't from focusing on getting rid of the bad habits or the whatever behavior or thinking it is that you want to stop. It's not going to help for you to be like, I did it again, I need to stop. Like you're just going to go in this spiral into even more crap, most likely. I do know what works though is that when you fill your intention, if you are purposeful with your intention to consume and absorb good and beneficial, you know, things, which often don't look good and beneficial until you've really hit like a bottom from chasing all the good looking and beneficially looking, good looking and seemingly beneficial things that are of the world, right? Until that lands you into,